Hi everybody, and welcome to Remote-a-thon. This is Guru's ongoing series of interactive talks with leaders in CX, sales enablement, and knowledge management. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Reena Ambai, Senior Sales Enablement Manager at SalesLoft. She's going to be talking to us about how her enablement team approached implementing a content strategy that gives reps all the resources they need to do their jobs while also protecting her enablement team's bandwidth and sanity, which is something I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. I will let Reena introduce herself in just a second, but first I'm Chandler. I'm a product marketing manager here at Guru. I've been here for about 2 years now and work out of our headquarters in Philly. Reena and I have collaborated in the past on a case study and I've had a great time putting this talk together. So I'm really excited to see what you've got for us. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Chandler. It's been so fun working with you. Like she said, I do enablement at SalesLoft. Just a quick bit about my background is I started off in services at SalesLoft and professional services. So implementing people, making sure that they got the SalesLoft system up and running. And through that experience, I realized I really liked seeing when organizations transformed what they did and the business outcomes they could get by just kind of changing their behavior, changing their workflow, which makes it sound easier than it is. Change management is really hard, but I kind of liked that hurdle, which is why I got into sales enablement. That's my favorite part of the job, is trying to convince people to do something differently and that it'll work out and it'll be amazing. Not always easy, but it's definitely worth it. And that's kind of why I decided to go into enablement. A quick bit about SalesLoft is that we are a sales engagement platform, and the easiest way for me to explain it is that if you put yourself in the shoes of your reps, they are expected to generate pipeline, which we can help with. We do that through what we call cadences, which is a series of phone, email, social touches, and we help them book that initial meeting. So whether you're an AE or an SDR, most of the time you're tasked to do that. Then you got to manage the opportunity, right? That's a pretty lengthy process and can be time consuming. So you can do that through SalesLoft as well, through a portion of our platform called Deals. So we're kind of with you throughout your whole sales funnel till you win the deal. And then finally, once you close that deal, you want to make sure that you're taking care of those customers, that they're getting the love from you, that they're successful. And most of the time you want to try to upsell them. So we can help with that as well. So we're kind of all the way across the funnel, helping sales reps get more output with the same amount of effort, which is really exciting. And they can get things like coaching help, being able to ramp more quickly and stay on brand with messaging through the help of SalesLoft. But now I'm ready to dive in. So if you could go to the next slide, Chandler, we're going to do some real talk here. And if you go one more slide, like I said, we work really quickly at SalesLoft. And in 2017, we were growing. And I felt like this lady on the left, like frazzled all the time. We're starting a new function, enablement. I wasn't sure what we should take on. I knew we had to be very particular about what we took on. But on a monthly basis, we had new reps joining, we had new product releases, and we had a very, very small enablement team and product marketing team to support it. When I say small, I mean there was two of us, like 2 people in enablement and 2, eventually 3 people in product marketing that could support it. So we're having to support dozens of current reps and kind of get new reps on board. So needless to say, it felt like a lot. With all that being said, we knew that we had to be really, really specific about the projects that we took on as a team. And we knew for a while that we would have to take on internal content strategy and produce assets for the reps, but it was overwhelming. We knew that we had to start. We had no baseline. We had to filter through all of the one-sheeter requests. We didn't know how to partner with SMEs to get some really technical content or content that took more than just our teams. We didn't know exactly what role we would play as sales enablement in that process, but we knew that it was something that we had to do. We had so many of these questions and more when we realized that we needed to help our customer-facing teams get content into their hands. But we also knew that what we were doing wasn't sustainable. So in order to not look like the woman on the left and more like the woman on the right, who seems a lot more calm, we knew that we had to take a systematic approach. And what I want to talk to you guys about today is how we got there. It was definitely a long journey, but if you're worth putting in the work, it can help you kind of make sure that you have this scalable infrastructure when it comes to content that you can use long term. So Chandler, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that sounds like a very daunting process to start when you're starting from scratch, and just what you said about having to work with different SMEs across the org, like thinking about all the different people who create content at Guru and that we have to work with, that sounds like in and of itself a beast to tackle.
Yeah, it was a lot, and I didn't really realize like how many people sometimes you needed to create one document. So it's definitely an overwhelming feeling at first, knowing just how to even start this process.
Yeah, I bet. I think for any given piece of knowledge at Guru, sometimes we have upwards of 5 or 6 teams working on it. So if anybody, wants to share in the chat how many different SMEs you work with to give knowledge to your sales team, let us know if we're not the only crazy ones who have a bunch of subject matter experts to wrangle over here. Oops.
I'm curious to see what people put in later, so I'm going to check that out. But yes, it takes a lot, and that's why we decided to introduce the content blueprint. So that's the focal point about, or what we're going to talk about today. And essentially what it is it's our internal methodology at SalesLoft as to how we develop rep-facing collateral at SalesLoft. It's basically looking at your sales funnel and looking at the sales stages and then defining which assets your rep would need at specific stages of the sales process. Today, we're going to walk through what the goal of the blueprint is, the process of creating it, and the product of it. I would say the finalish product of it, because it's never really done once we took a first pass at it. And before we really dive deep though, like anything in life, there are some trade-offs you have to make. So I want to talk about what it means if you really do decide to take on this adventure. Some of us have spent hours and hours creating content before, only to find out that maybe 1 or 2 people on your team used it, or it got sent once or twice, which is really sad. Or sometimes you feel like you're herding cats and you need like 10 people to help you create a piece of content, and then nobody uses it. And it feels like you're not getting the most yield for the effort that you're putting in. And that's the goal. That's all the goal of the blueprint is to simplify that process and make sure that you're getting the most out of the hours that you're putting in. But that means that sometimes you're going to have to say no. And I know that's hard for us in enablement sometimes, because we get into the role because we want to help people, we want to make a difference, but you will have to say no to some of the content requests you're getting in order to be laser focused on the blueprint itself and what you've committed to, which we'll get into a little bit later. And by saying no, it means that you and your team have to trust that the long-term process and the outcome of it, the benefits will outweigh some of the short-term gains of always saying yes, or being able to take on content requests and things like that. But I think most importantly, because this happens a lot sometimes in enablement, is that it allows you to be strategic instead of reactive to content requests. So I'm sure all of us get those requests for one-sheeters, or, oh, it would be nice to have X, Y, and Z. And that's not sustainable as you try to get your org to grow or your department to grow. So this process is meant to give you a holistic lens of how you can approach content at your company.
Awesome. Yeah, and for anybody who joined Joe from Yuck's session last week, we talked about the importance of having sort of an enablement charter that talks about what you will and won't do. So I think this content blueprint sort of falls right in line with that in terms of protecting your team's bandwidth, allowing you to be more strategic. So I'm excited to see how you guys went about doing it.
Yes. I need to listen to that one. But yeah, to make this process more digestible, we're going to talk about it in 3 distinct parts. So mapping your content and what that looks like, getting confirmation and alignment from your other stakeholders, and then actually beginning to execute and build on your content. So if you want to flip to the next slide, one more, we're going to talk specifically about mapping the content. So what this means is actually going through and mapping out your sales stages. So prospecting, discovery, developing, whatever you have, and the goal of each stage of the sales cycle. So specifically what I mean, because this can be hard to conceptualize initially, is what is the rep trying to achieve in that stage? And that should really dictate your content. So when we looked at SalesLoft, I'll give you the example of our developing stage. Our reps are responsible for qualifying the opportunity, getting information to do that, identifying the right stakeholders and the key decision makers, getting agreements on key pain points, using demos, customized demos to uncover additional information, establishing mutual success plans, and identifying competitors. So that's a lot of stuff. Yeah, they're responsible for a lot in that stage, which means that they probably need a lot of content to be able to support that. But the reason that I bring it up is because when you're thinking about this process and conceptualizing it, you definitely want to take off your PMM and enablement hat, and you want to put yourself in your reps' shoes. It's not going to work if you keep your enablement hats on. I know that we love to look at things through that lens, but you have to try to understand what your rep is going through and what they would need in that point in time. And I did also put, I know it's kind of an ugly screenshot, but the point of it is that it doesn't need to be fancy at all. So ours lived on a Google Sheet. Literally, we opened up a Google Sheet, we mapped out those stages, and then took a pass at what we thought the team would need. And when we did this as enablement and product marketing, we came up with somewhere around 25 to 30 pieces of content. And I do mean internal and external content, because some of the stuff needed to be customer facing and brand approved, while others were simply training documents. So there was kind of this mix, but it felt like a lot of content. 30 pieces of content did feel like quite a bit.
Yeah, that's a lot. And I want to kind of double click on that internal versus external piece that you just mentioned, because I think oftentimes when people hear sales content, they only think of external one sheets or case studies or customer facing assets. So I'd love if you could just take us through some of what those internal pieces were that you guys identified.
Yeah, absolutely. So some things that come to mind are, we have like objection handling documents, which enablement can certainly create. That's training type of stuff. Battle cards, that's another good example of things. Breakdowns of each persona, what they care about, what their pain points are, specific discovery questions for those personas. All of those things kind of came up as the internal bucket. And then anything that would ever be sent to a prospect, trust me, you don't want our team making it. Definitely not a skill set, but that's something that we would rely on our product marketing counterparts for.
Awesome. Yeah, that's very helpful. I feel like the internal component is so often missed, but you need that sort of behind the scenes knowledge to be able to send the external content.
Yeah, and I think you were the one that pointed this out, Chandler, which is like the training docs that are internal can be created internally, but something that's really important that she called out is everything needs to be trained on, regardless of if it's an internal or external facing doc. So if it's an objection handling doc, we have to train the reps on how to use it. But even if it's something like a technical packet, we need to train them on how to use it, how to have that conversation, what context to send it in, who it's most helpful to send it to. So all of that comes into play like during building and executing as well.
Awesome. So you guys said you came up with like 25 to 30 pieces of content. I think just trying to sit here and think about our different sales stages and trying to even like eyeball how many pieces of content we would come up with, it seems impossible. I wonder if anybody in the chat has like just like a ballpark idea how many they would come up with, but it sounds like you really need to sit down and like do this mapping out process, because my like gut instinct would be way higher than 25 or 30 just off the bat.
Yeah, honestly, I thought we would get 30 is a lot. It took a lot of effort, but when I first thought, like when my boss told me about it and we started mapping it out, I was like, I don't know how we're going to do this. It's going to be hundreds of things. And you realize there's like repetition, or some things can be consolidated and added onto. So it did help going through the exercise and actually physically doing it. And that is where one piece of advice comes in, is like, don't get hung up on the amount of content that comes out of the exercise. Just be honest with yourselves and document everything, and make sure it's as encompassing as you can make it, just so you can properly work with other stakeholders and set the right expectations.
Awesome. That sounds like a good segue to your next section.
Yeah, and so this is a big part. I don't want it to go unnoticed, but it's worth diving into. So it's imperative that your blueprint is a joint effort between you and your marketing team. For us, what that meant was our product marketing team. And all of us probably have badass marketing teams that have great top of the funnel content, meaning like as they become a lead, they've had this robust strategy. But what happens when that lead converts to an opportunity? Then what does the content strategy look like? What happens when they are at that discovery stage or the qualified stage? That's sometimes where the ball a little bit, or it's not as robust, but that's perfect because that's where sales enablement can step in and kind of bridge that gap. So if you go to the next slide, it is really important to get buy-in from top down. And I know this can feel a little bit daunting or like it's not necessary. It seems like an extra step. I don't know if I want to go through that. But when I say this, it's for a reason. Like the content blueprint at SalesLoft was talked about with our CRO at the time, with our CMO at the time, with our VP of sales over and over again, because like in any enablement role, you're going to be asked to shift priorities regularly. And this is a good way for you to go back to them and just remind them that it's something that everybody agreed to. And frankly, it's going to take more than one quarter sometimes to execute on this. For us, it did. So you do have to be aligned and create that muscle of reminding people of like, this is what we've agreed to. This is one of our priorities. Let's make sure we're able to actually execute on it. And then you also want that horizontal buy-in as well. So there's going to be a lot of people that you need to make this content happen, not just at an ELT or VP level, but the people that are actually going to create it. Make sure they get a say in what should be in there. And they normally have good ideas. And if you give them buy-in at the beginning, it means that they will be motivated to make sure it's part of their bandwidth, or that they have bandwidth to execute on it. And it's part of their OKRs or whatever structure you use. Yeah, it's an area where we win battles, but we won some too. And that's kind of the way it goes. That's how good partnership works. And then one thing I don't want to fall short is that obviously get your sales team's buy-in. We do this in a very specific way at SalesLoft. We use what we call the Sales Advisory Committee. So it's a cross-functional. We have sales engineers, commercial SDRs, enterprise account executives, a representative from all of them. And we literally mapped out the stages on a board back when we were in the office and said, hey, put sticky notes. What do you think you use at each stage? And we quickly found that what they were putting on the board, we didn't give them any framework of what we had done, really closely matched and mirrored what we had come up with as a sales and marketing org together. So it's nice to see some of those trends and overlap.
Yeah, sounds like you guys were very aligned and very attuned to what your reps need. That's awesome.
We're trying to be. A couple good things came out of it, but it was worth the exercise. And if you go to the next slide, this is where we landed. So it's 35 key pieces of content. It did go up a little bit. This is not all encompassing. It's not all 35 of our things, but it's a version of it. And I'll be really honest in that it did take a quarter to even gain agreement and get the right stakeholders to put it on their OKRs and make sure it came to fruition. But we knew that that was a worthy step and a worthy way of undertaking this project. And we did have to be realistic in terms of what it meant for dividing and conquering the work. So we'll get into a little bit of that later when we talk about building and executing, but just know that this was like the draft that we kind of landed on that we committed to executing.
Yeah, and you've mentioned a few times sort of getting buy-in from those stakeholders, the subject matter experts who are going to have to be helping with content. Can you give us an idea of sort of how that breakdown shook out across this sort of whole customer journey? Were there different teams involved at the beginning or towards the end? How did that look?
Yeah, actually, and I'll thank Chandler for this. She kind of brought it to my attention, which is that we ended up working a lot with our, I wouldn't say product marketing counterparts, but our marketing counterparts in stages 1 and 2 for the most part, because you've got prospecting stages, right? So you need buyer's guide, ebooks, stuff like that. They are heavily involved in, and that's where we used a lot of their expertise. Mm-hmm. And then as you get later on in the funnel, you do need more, let's say, SME specific content. So what I mean by that is like we needed legal docs, right? We needed security docs. We needed IT's help to get our data flow and diagrams and architecture and things like that. And then we needed services involved to make sure that we're offering the right SOWs and all the services packaging that we have. So you will notice as you go through the funnel that who you're working with most frequently will kind of change as you go.
Yeah, and it sounds like super important that you got those people sort of involved from the beginning, because who knows better than your security expert what kind of security questions end up coming up in stage 5. So it's good to have even them be proactively involved with identifying the content that they know that the sales team will need, rather than you guys just trying to guess, right?
And honestly, they They might be a little reluctant at first. Our team is pretty good about that stuff, but the reason that you can get their buy-in, or you should be able to overcome maybe some of the hesitation at first, is because if they're willing as a security team to put in some of the work now and build this content for you, again, going back to that long-term play, hopefully once it's built, the quarter afterward, they get less questions and they get hit up less by reps, right? So it kind of helps everyone in the long term get aligned, essentially.
Yeah, and I'm sure as soon as you phrase it that way, any reluctant subject matter expert would be like, oh, less repeat questions for me? Sure, I'll help out.
Yeah, one less slack. So if you go to the next slide, or the next one more down, is that it is a big undertaking. I won't try to rosy the picture, and it's lengthy, so you have to be patient. But the key is to be really realistic with yourself and the other stakeholders about what you can accomplish in an allotted amount of time. And this is where Guru comes in, because it can be your vehicle of getting that information out there. So like I said, at the time we began the project, there's 2 product marketers and 2 enablement people. So this is not a big enablement product marketing org that I'm talking about. We were pretty scrappy, and we decided to commit to 8 pieces of content over the quarter. And the way that we decided it is we did have columns on our very old school spreadsheet about level of effort and the impact it would take. And we tried to kind of prioritize from there. So you can imagine things like the tech deck and the security deck obviously are huge lifts because of the amount of people that you have to work with. But things like objection handling docs, training docs, and things like that can be pushed out a little bit easier. But a couple of things that you want to keep in mind, I think I mentioned this earlier, the general rule of thumb for us was that enablement was creating internal content and PMM was creating external content. But one thing that needs to be noted is that when you start to release these items, because they will all come to a head at the end of the quarter, at least it did for us, your reps only have a certain amount of mind share. So make sure you are training in a way that it will stick for them. So we always go over what stage we think it would be used in most frequently, how to have conversations around it, what to do when your prospects respond, and things like that. So a tech deck, when you send it out, like, please send it out proactively. You can't get around IT as much as you try, so engage them early. If they come back with questions, loop in your solutions engineer, try to get them on a call. The collateral is really nothing unless you do the training with it. So make sure you have a plan for how you're going to release the asset so it doesn't kind of fall flat and it just becomes this thing you put out there that no one uses.
Yeah, that training and instructions is almost like another type of internal facing knowledge. It's like the knowledge about the knowledge. Here's how you have to use it. And that has to be just as important.
Yeah, exactly. So actually, if you go to the next slide, we tried to, it didn't always happen because we had other people putting in content in Guru too, but basically we had a master sales content blueprint card, and we would link to another Guru card sometimes. And essentially it would be like when to use it, like I just talked about, what to use it, the process for using it, what you can expect in the document. So we did it for 2 reasons. It gave them the context they needed. That's why Guru is so great. But then it did give us more visibility into what's popular, which we're going to get into in terms of the feedback loop of how to actually make your content better.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear what the rep reaction to this undertaking was.
Yeah, actually they did love it. So we had a high demand for content that we weren't able to fulfill before we used this project. But it is important to get their feedback. Again, we use a sales advisory committee to get that feedback the quarter afterward and see how things were going, just kind of qualitative feedback, asking the managers like, hey, do you see this being used? Lucky for us, we have our own innate call recording technology. So we can actually go into our platform and see like, hey, do they pull up that mutual success plan that we talked about? Are they actually using the key criteria and the first call deck slides that we've been making? So that gives us some good anecdotal evidence. And then the quantitative inputs, that's where Guru comes in and can be helpful. You can see the reason we made individual cards for each thing is because we wanted to see how many times things were favorited or how many times cards were viewed and things like that. So we could see what the team was actually using versus what stuff maybe we don't need to keep iterating on long term. But those are kind of, and marketing automation systems help, right? Because the buyer's guide was also on, it was not only something our reps were sending out, but it was on our website and things like that. So we were getting multiple input. inputs to help basically craft our content and make our strategy better over long term.
Awesome.
But I'll wrap it up so we can make sure that everyone gets time to ask questions if there are any, which is that this is never going to be perfect and it's always a work in progress. I know that's hard for people in enablement, even myself, because we like to make sure that what we're doing is perfect and it's a beautiful piece of art, but that's sometimes not how it goes. And I will warn you, this was hard for me, and it does take kind of shifting your mindset a little bit. Share it early and often. So you have content that you need SME help for. That means share it with them early on, get their thoughts early on. I would hate for you to go 75% through a technical deck or security deck and then find out that some of it is not relevant, or you have to start it from scratch. So I learned that lesson the hard way. Don't learn it, take it from me. And then I think there's a famous quote that's relevant here, which is the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. The next best time is now. So if you're feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling like you need to do this, it's not too late. You just gotta roll up your sleeves and start doing it, and it'll be worth it. So that's all I've got.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Reena. That was so great. I think we're gonna open it up to Q&A now. So if anybody has got questions, feel free to post them in the chat, or if you want to turn your video on, chat with us, feel free to do that as well. I might steal the first question and kick us off. So Reena, you said, start now, you got to just get going. Having gone through this extensive exercise, is there something that you know now, having gone through it, that you wish you knew back then? Maybe it was like a specific stakeholder you wish you'd looped in earlier, or which stage took you the longest? What's something that you wish you could tell Reena from 2017?
I think it would mostly be that it would be okay, right? It feels like something that you shouldn't take on, or between all of us, it can sometimes feel like you might ruffle feathers, or you have to ask people to prioritize something differently. And I was like a little bit, I'm an introvert by nature, so asking people to do that was difficult for me at first. But I think once you show people the value of what you're trying to do and you take the time to walk them through the process, they do get bought in and they want to help, especially if you're working at companies most tech companies have great culture, great things like that. And I found that to be true at SalesLoft, is the more that you involve people and the more you invite them into the process, the more that they want to help truly. And you have to be willing to be wrong sometimes, which can be hard, right? So if somebody says like, no, I don't think that's right, or I don't think that's where that piece of content goes, or whatever it is, you have to be vulnerable enough for that to happen and be open to learning, because it's going to be a shift for you, for most orgs. It was for us in terms of how to tackle it. And the good thing is now it's a muscle, right? So when we acquired the last company that we did, the expectation is now that the sales content blueprint gets updated by us and product marketing. So that was a good outcome of it.
That's awesome. We've got a question from Deborah about your sales advisory committee. She's wondering if you could repeat the different departments, or I guess key stakeholders that are on your committee.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something we started same year, but it's everyone from the way our org is structured: a commercial SDR, one enterprise SDR, a frontline manager, which was important, an AE frontline manager and an SDR frontline manager, a commercial AE, mid-market AE, enterprise AE, sales engineer, account manager. We try not to put directors and VPs in the room specifically just because we want them to be as open and transparent as possible. And then we do have actually product marketing in the room, a representative, just because the joke at SalesLoft is like, they're like our cousins. Like we work so closely together that it makes sense to have them in the room most of the time.
Gotcha. So it sounds like one rep from sort of every segment. And how do you narrow in on who joins the council? Is it a high performing rep, or what do you look for?
Yeah, so it's a combo of things. We'll definitely try to snag some of the high performing reps. We'll get recommendations from managers. Ultimately, what we're looking for, and typically this isn't a problem in sales, it will more so be on the post-sale side later on when we build it out, is just somebody that's willing to be raw and honest. Like for the most part, you're not going to hurt our feelings. We just need to have very constructive feedback for what we're doing. And we need to have people that are willing to sometimes develop the shape of something with us and go through that process. So as long as they're willing to do that, that's kind of what we're looking for in a member.
Awesome. That sounds like something we could implement at Guru, actually. I'm excited to take that one back.
Yeah, it's worked out well.
So you mentioned that when you guys acquired your last company, you refreshed the content strategy and that was the expectation. How does that sort of like audit and refresh system work? Like how often are you expected to look at it again? Do you ever start from scratch, God forbid? Like how do you keep it fresh?
So I will say we're like more in maintenance mode right now. We don't necessarily refresh as often. But I will give an example, like when we did acquire Costello and launched Deals at SalesLoft, which was a completely other product line, we made sure that before we went to the reps with anything like training wise, that we had updated our objection handling document, that we had updated our persona and what discovery questions you would ask. The buyer's guide needed to be updated. This is now a new part of the platform. It means that our offering has changed and the value we can provide has changed. So it really is like, I think we have a good handle on the assets we've developed. Now it's about whenever we do something big as an organization, making sure that the right stakeholders are bought into making sure it's updated by the specific time we go live or release it to the reps, so to speak.
Gotcha. And it sounds like you guys have a couple different offerings or product lines. How did those like tie into the content strategy? Is you've just got one content strategy that accounts for multiple solutions, or how do you equip reps to talk about your different offerings?
Yeah, so it's just one strategy. We ended up just adding stuff as we went along, and as we got more products, we trained at that speed. So for us, it was obviously at first SalesLoft Core, and then we acquired a company called Note Ninja, so we trained and enabled on that. And then it was Deals, and we trained and enabled on that. And then in terms of like ongoing product training, we use a combination of Guru, like making cards and making sure that our launch decks are in there. And then a combination of Lessonly, who's our LMS provider, and we'll send weekly Lessonlies to make sure that the reps are up to date on that. In terms of product, it's not as heavily dependent on the content blueprint. It'll be like a few different channels that we try to use and bring everything together in.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. Anybody else has questions, feel free to put them in the chat so I'm not monopolizing, but I do have another one if you're up for it, Reena.
Yeah, absolutely. And feel free, everyone, like this is really casual for me, like unmute yourself if you have a question. Happy to answer them.
Yeah, jump on in here. So the goal of this was to sort of either cut down on or sort of manage the like constant incoming content requests. What happens now when I'm sure sales reps still request content all the time because that's what they like to do. So what's your process like now when you get those requests that are sort of outside of the content strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that we should probably, in full transparency, still get better at. But we have a form that we ask them to fill out, and the general gist of it, which I'm sure people in enablement and PMM can relate to internal roles, is that if you can't take a few minutes to fill out a form, I want to take your request seriously, but we need you to be able to do that. So we'll go through the form, and then when we meet weekly as a product marketing and enablement org, so we can kind of go through those requests and see if it's something that we want to add. So for example, when we did add that product line of Deals, we did decide to add a line item to the content blueprint of what's new, specifically for our account managers to start telling this to their current customers. So we are open to adding things, but it definitely needs to be a conversation if we're going to do it, because it's a commitment that isn't just a one-time commitment, it's an ongoing commitment of maintenance. So.
And I think even that's a good point, that sort of like the one-time nature of some of these requests. I feel like that's sort of a rule of thumb at Guru. If it's something that's like really specific to one deal, does that really need to be a content piece? Or if it's something that can be applicable to a lot of deals, I think that makes us a little bit more inclined to support that request.
Exactly.
All right, we've got another question from Deborah. She wants to know about how you decide which of your content lives in Lessonly versus Guru, and do you have the same content in both platforms?
So no, actually, the content will always live in Guru. That was our repository. That way, if they ever searched for it, they would be able to find it. So that was our single source of truth. In terms of what we would do with Lessonly was more of the training aspect of the content. So I'll go back to the technical packet. Hey, sales rep, what we would actually administer through Lessonly is like, here's a stage that we see you using it in most frequently. Here's a conversation you should have around it, or some words that you could say when you send it. Here's the people that you should be proactively sending it to get their buy-in. Here's what you need to do if they have questions about it. And here's kind of how you can contextualize this deck, point them to this page. If this is the scenario, point them to X page if that's the scenario. So we really use Lessonly as a training vehicle for it, but then we use Guru as the centralized repository and ongoing way for reps to access that content, if that helps.
Yeah, that was a great breakdown. We hear that a lot from customers who use both. And yeah, it sounds like, you know, going through your training is good for different learning types, but I think if you want to come back to that content later, it's good to have it in a central, like a single source of truth, like Guru, like you mentioned. Awesome. Let's see if anybody else has some questions. If not, we can wrap up a little bit early. This was such a great session, Reena. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. If anyone has any questions, feel free to find me on LinkedIn, find me through Chandler, email me, doesn't matter. Happy to answer them.
Awesome. Oops. I think we've got just one last call out here. You can also get in touch with us on the Guru community. So if you're in Slack and want to interact with other Guru customers or the Guru team, go ahead and join that community through that link there. I can also post that in the chat, or Chris, if you're able to post that, that would be great. And then we also have, there we go. We also have an events page, so you can catch upcoming events and webinars. We've got more stuff just like this coming up. Well, not just like this, obviously, can't duplicate this session, but we have 2 more Sales Enablement Remote-a-thon sessions that you guys can join in August. So those are on the 13th and the 20th. So go ahead to remoteacon.getguru.com. You can find the sign-up links for both of those, and we'll hope to see you again soon. So if nobody else has any other questions, I think we'll call it a day.
Thanks, Chandler. Thank you, everyone. Had fun.
Yeah. See ya.